Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the IHC Craft Room. I'm super excited you're here with me tonight. And this is a bit of a different live for me. We're doing a recap tonight. And that's because last night's how-to live number 11, where we made this beautiful dot painted star, unfortunately, I was having tech issues and my camera was hella blurry. I'm hoping that this is much more crisp and in focus tonight. And I apologize if it's not perfect because I'm also dealing with a bit of dilated eyes from an eye appointment. Yeah, they just happen to align with each other. I don't want to talk about it. Let's pretend it's not happening. So what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through the steps that I did last night to make this beautiful star. And we'll start with step number 1, which is this is actually how the star came to me from the Dollar Tree. I picked this up for $1.75. It's a wall hanging. It came with a jute string, and I'm going to put it back on so I can hang this on my wall later. Now, I decided for this project that I didn't want to paint a base coat, and instead I used a beautiful dark walnut wood stain. This is Varathane, and I picked this up, I think at Home Depot or possibly Canadian Tire some time ago. I use it on a ton of my projects. I love it. It's a beautiful, rich color. And I apply it using a foam brush, but to wipe off the excess, which I highly recommend you do, I used a piece of an old t-shirt. And I very much recommend that because if you paint with your wood stain and then try to use like a paper towel or something, you're going to end up with some floofs and stuff stuck in your stain, which you definitely don't want. So using an old t-shirt will really help avoid that, because you'll be able to absorb that extra stain that you don't want on your star, but still not have those flyaways that kind of embed themselves. So that's basically how I did the base coat on this beautiful project. Now, generally speaking, when I work with rhinestones, and there are tons of them in this project, I will dot first and add rhinestones after the dots have completely dried. And what I mean by completely is completely. It has to be at minimum like 3 hours, 4 hours. That's the way you know, especially these bigger dots that have more paint in them. You'll know that it's dried all the way through if you give it that time to fully solidify. Now, after I stained my base, I then added a coat of matte varnish. I like to use Liquitex matte varnish. This is my go-to, but really any varnish will do. And what we're doing by adding this varnish is ensuring that if we make any steps and missteps while we're dot painting, we will be able to rectify that by using a damp Q-tip and scrubbing it off and not be concerned about stripping our base because we're going to have that varnish protecting it. So I highly recommend that you take the time to add varnish. So what does that mean? If you've stained your wood, you got to let it dry really well. So at minimum, a couple of hours, but really if you want to be like by the book, 4 to 8 hours minimum. And then you want to add this varnish on top, thin layers. 2 coats would be best, but 1 will do you. And again, making sure that your base is super dry before you do your varnish. Once the varnish is completely dry, we get started with our pattern. Now, this time around, I did use I put my rhinestone right in the center first, as opposed to doing all my dots and then adding the rhinestone. And I did that because I was doing it live and I felt like it was important to have that center stone in place. Now, all of these rhinestones I picked up from the dollar store, and they are like stickers, you know what I mean? They have that backing on them that is sticky, but it's not that sticky. So if you're going to be using it in a project like this, I highly recommend that you put a little dab of glue and absolutely put the glue where you want it and add the jewel on top, as opposed to adding the glue to the jewel and then putting it down. That never ends well for me. So dab glue, add jewel, and you're golden. So first step was adding this center jewel in the middle. I did use a ruler to try to roughly estimate where that center line was at the peak of my star and to that base part here, and also across. Now, I didn't go peak to peak because that's definitely not the middle. I kind of went somewhere in the middle. And I did a little cross shape using a chalk pencil. I highly highly recommend you invest in a chalk pencil if you don't have one. This is a General's chalk pencil. It's a 2-pack you can get from Michael's. And I always recommend using a 40% discount if possible at Michael's, because who doesn't want a discount? And I did a little center cross there and dropped my rhinestone on top. After that, I used this silicone mold that I picked up from the Happy Dotting Company. I think they're based out of the UK. Highly recommend them. I think her name is Angela, and they have beautiful molds. It's the molds I pick up for making my own art stones. I get them from Happy Dotting Company, so definitely check them out. And I also get these dotting tool. These rods are also from Happy Dotting Company. So anyway, I basically just tried to eyeball the center of my rhinestone, and I used my chalk pencil to do this inner circle and this middle. Actually, I think I did all 3 circles very, very lightly. Now, you can absolutely use guidelines all the live long day. And I do from time to time, but not very much, because I happen to enjoy when things are not perfectly symmetrical or in alignment or whatever, because that's what makes it handmade, in my opinion. It's all those little imperfections that give it character. So that's my philosophy, and that's the reason why I didn't really do a ton of guidelines, but I did do some. Now, before I forget, always use your guidelines by all means. You could cover this thing in guidelines. But when you're done, let your dots dry completely. So easily 3 to 6 hours. Let them completely dry, especially these really big ones. And then you're going to go in and you could use a damp Q-tip, but I recommend a good eraser. It works even better than a damp Q-tip to erase those lines. Highly important if you are going to do a top coat of varnish, which I do recommend you do, to preserve your work and also to just make everything look pretty and glossy. So remember to erase your guidelines before you varnish. Now, in terms of the actual pattern that we did last night, I started with my 3mm stylus to do these dots in the center here. And I started with white for row 1, and then we expanded to white for row 2. But instead of using that 3mm, I actually found my 4mm, or possibly it was a 3.5, but I think I did 4 for this next row 2. Then in addition to that, we went up 1 more. So 4.5 to the next one. Where's my 4.5? Anyway, it was my 4.5 dotting tool to do this round over here. And I did make a point of adding my dot in between the spaces of the row before, as you can see. Now you can always fill in all of these gaps. I like to leave everything open for a couple of reasons. I really do enjoy the negative space of the background and the stain. And also, this is what makes this so beginner friendly, because we're really just practicing concepts here, as opposed to packing in a lot of different mandala style or dot painting style elements and really covering the surface. That's what like super duper experienced dot painters do. But we keep it more chill here at the IHC Craft Room. And I like to leave it open for people who want to try dot painting. Like, what a pretty fun project. So after we did all of these circles in the center, we moved on to adding some bigger dots in a cross formation. Now, if you're not using guidelines, using the cross formation is the best way you can try to have a symmetrical look to your project. What I mean by that is find your center point, drop your dot, and then you're going to do the exact opposite to the bottom, and you're going to do your edges. And you can always flip if you like, or stay in position. I have a tendency to do a little bit of both, turn when I'm dotting and also stay in line. But you can see I have these set up as a cross. And then in the in-between patterns, we have these 2 really large silver dots. So let's talk about these pink ones first. Those were a size 10, if I'm not mistaken. On my dotting tool, the 10.0 rod for this large pink dot here, all the way around. And then we did no, it was not the 3mm. I think this was the 4 for this smaller pink dot here. And then for these larger silver dots, we went for a really, really big one. If I'm not mistaken, it was the 14, which is a really nice big surface for a large dot, and gave that the 14. Now, anytime you're dot painting with a large tool like this, where you want to cover a lot of the surface, it's really important that you put a lot of paint on your dotting tool. So you're going to want to try to use a palette or something that's a bit more deep. Feel free to even use a pod like this, but something that has a bit more of a ability to hold that paint so that you can really submerge your dotting tool and get it covered really deeply with that paint, because that will give you a chance to far exceed the size of your dotting tool if you choose to. If you have a lot of paint on your dotting tool and then you drop your dot, you can get yourself a dot that's 3 or 4 times the size of this. Okay, 3 or 4 times is way too big, but much larger than the actual dotting tool itself. So in terms of colors, which I haven't talked about yet, you know what the wood stain was. And I used all paints from Dollarama, Deco Art, Crafters Acrylic. I mostly use these paints exclusively, with the occasional one that I pick up from Michael's, which might be folk art, or another deco art as well. But I picked these all up at Dollarama. I think they were $1.50 each, and they last me for many, many projects. So I highly recommend that you invest in some primary colors if you want to do some crafting. You can use these for all kinds of things. So today we're using the color white, Tutti Frutti, and Silver Morning. And for Tutti Frutti, which is this darker or more vibrant pink, I then created this light version with a significant amount of white. And then I slowly added in that pink Tutti Frutti until we got to this really, really light pink, almost blush color. So these are the 3 colors that we did for the entirety of the project. And all of the jewels were also kind of like same. So anything silver has like a straight up crystal jewel. Anything pink has a beautiful pink jewel. And I just love the way that looks. And I was super jazzed that I had these like teardrop ones, which were so fun to kind of add as extra accents all along the edges, kind of like going into the points of the star. Really pretty. Okay, so once we did those pink larger dots, I moved on to doing a walk the dots around each. Now, the start off on the walk the dots in the center here was my 3mm stylus. I used that light pink that we created, and I made sure to put really, really big amounts of it on my dotting tool so I could get a really large center dot. And then I'm pretty sure I went down to another stylus, or perhaps I kept this one and just started dotting. So if you're going to walk the dots, what you do is start off with as much paint as you can on your stylus, and then you are not going to reload your dotting tool with paint. That one time is all you get for walking the dots, and then we just keep moving. So you dot all the way down until slowly but surely your dotting tool runs out of paint and you end up with these beautiful tiny dots at the bottom. If they start going wonky on you in size, I highly recommend just going to a smaller size stylus and adding that paint and going back to cover them up. It'll make them look better and you'll feel better about it. It's not a big deal. It's an easy way to adjust your walk the dots. So that's how we did this inner ring all the way around. And then on the outer one, I actually went down in size, which I don't normally do. Usually if I'm doing multiple walk the dots, like as this kind of petal shape, I'll end up going bigger and bigger. But this time I decided to go a little smaller. So rather than using my 3mm here, I actually went down to the 2mm stylus to make my top dot. And I actually did 3 the same size before walking the rest. And how do you make them the same size as opposed to walking the dots? The difference is that you're going to keep dipping back into your paint in order to get the same size dot. You need to have the same amount of paint on your stylus. So when I started with that top one and I knew that that was the size I was going to replicate for the first 2 or 3, I made sure to go back and fill my stylus with more paint and drop it and make sure that I got them as close in size as I could. And then after going back for a 3rd time, on that 4th dot, we just start walking. No more adding paint, and we get down to these really tiny dots. Super pretty. From that point, we moved on to making these silver large dots in the center, which I briefly touched upon earlier. I believe I used the 14 for that, which is a nice big size and a lot of paint on the stylus. I mentioned that earlier, making sure that you really get good contact with your surface. And throughout all of this, something I really want to highlight is to always pop your bubbles. It's very, very important. If you don't have a little tool like I do, you could probably use your really, really sharp or tiny stylus. That would be a good option as well. But never forget our friends, not the Q-tips, the toothpicks. Toothpicks generally come really pointy, and they will do the job nicely to pop all those bubbles. Make sure you always check and you always pop your bubbles as you're going, because if you don't, either you don't notice the bubble or you leave it alone. What may very well happen is a little bit later when your dot starts to dry, the bubble will naturally pop. But because the paint isn't completely fluid anymore, because it's started to dry a little bit, that popped bubble will stay in the tacky paint and it will become part of your final design. Maybe that's your cup of tea, in which case, do you, boo, but not mine. So I definitely always make a point of double checking and popping all the dots, the bubbles that I find. Definitely for these larger ones. And another thing to make note of when you're making these really large dots, where you have a lot of paint on your stylus and you're dropping a really large dot, you may find that you get a peak in the center. Now, that's not a problem. You might enjoy that peak and want to leave it, and by all means do that. But if you wanted to do something like I did here, which is add another layer on top, in this case, it's a rhinestone. In other cases, it might be another top dot. You want to make sure that you smooth out those large dots so that they don't have a peak, only because it'll make your life easier when you do drop that other dot on top, if it's a level surface. So what I recommend you do is when that paint is wet, use a stylus, any one, but it would be best if it was a bit of a thicker one, like this one, the 3mm, and go ahead in that dot and just spiral that extra paint out from that center peak, push it out to the edges. You obviously need to be very careful that you don't exceed your actual dot, but by doing that and leveling out the paint, it really gives you a much better surface to work with if you're doing a top dot or if you're adding a rhinestone like I did here. So that's something to consider when you have these really large dots. So once we completed those large dots, at that point we had our two pinks, we had our walk the dot petals around them, and then we had these big silver dots that went in. After that, I was like, well, we definitely need some more silver. So we added another big silver dot on the edge of each of these. Now, this one was a bit of a smaller size. Remember, these large ones were about a 14. So if I'm not mistaken, I think I did like an 11 or something. Yeah, that looks about right, to get those nice big silver dots on each side. I really enjoyed the way that looked, and I again smoothed out the centers, and that made me go and look for my teardrop shaped rhinestones, which I just love. They're so cute, and I just love how they give that elongated, really that extra star shape. You know what I mean? Super, super cute. So we added those to the edges here, and obviously not here because that would be pornographic and not cool. So that's the way we started. Okay. The next step is to do these swipes on either side. Now, to do the swipe, I started by using my 3mm stylus in white paint and dropping a dot on either side. One first. I only work one swipe at a time. So you drop your dot, and then I would drag it forward to a certain point, about maybe halfway, and then stop using that 3mm stylus. And at that point, I switched to my very, very small, finest one, the 0.8, in order to keep dragging that paint to a very, very fine tip. So you need to really take your time. You'll notice that none of my swipes are perfect. They're all slightly misshaped. Some of them are perfectly like curved and others are very straight. It doesn't matter. They all look pretty. And in the end, the entire design is really impactful and pretty. So I don't stress over things like that. This is a great way to practice doing a swipe, is putting it in the middle of a design that whether it's perfect or not perfect doesn't matter, because as a whole, it looks really pretty. So great way to practice swipes. So that was the second step there. Already with our teardrop jewels in place, then we've got our white dots on either side. We made them into swipes. And from that point, we moved on to these large pink dots in the center here. So that's the light pink that we created out of white and the Tutti Frutti pink. And I believe these were around an 8, if I'm not mistaken. No, that's too small. So it was probably closer to a 10 again. Let's see. Yes. So we used the 10.0 for these light pink main dots, dropped in between. And that is the base of our pattern. From that point, we started to build up in terms of top dots, rhinestones, etc. So while I was letting that dry, I moved on to doing the accents on each of the star tips. And I used my 3mm stylus for that, and Tutti Frutti paint, this really pretty pink, in the corners. I made sure to go 4 on this side, 4 on that side, or rather 3, 3, and 1 in the peak. And then we did a 4 pattern of that light pink as well on each side. So I repeated that all the way across each tip of the star, obviously. And then once that dried, I went back and we started doing our top dots. Now, full disclosure, when you're working on a project, it is in your best interest to really let that base of your pattern dots dry. So this whole original should have dried really, really well, like easily a couple of hours before we would have progressed to top dots or putting rhinestones. But since I did this during the live, I didn't have that luxury. So I did them as they were. And a lot of these were dropped onto wet paint. And I didn't end up putting glue because I didn't need to. The paint grabbed onto the rhinestones very nicely. But I don't recommend that because it was very stressful. It would be much easier to do this when your dots are dry, and then you can come in with a little bit of Gorilla Glue and just drop a little dot and place your rhinestone on top. But let me say this really clear. This stuff dries so hella fast. You need to work very, very quickly, because the second you drop that rhinestone in the glue, they've already become besties for life. And to separate them is going to take quite the skill set. Okay. So you've been warned, and I warn myself about it every time, and I still end up moving too slow. And then something stays where I don't really want it. But anyway, and that's when you then go ahead and take care of all of the top dots. So what we did for top dots is this center here. I think I used the top of a stylus, if I'm not mistaken, which would be, I believe the top of each stylus is a 1.25mm ball. So I used this really light pink, and I just dotted right in the center of the white dots all the way around that center rhinestone to get that top dot for the first row. In the second row, I went up, and instead of using the 1.25, I actually used the 2mm, this pink one. Nope, that's not true. The 2.5, and that dropped these beautiful silver dots right in the middle of the white dots of row number 2, giving them a really pretty top dot. Next, we went into row 3, which is the biggest of all of our dots, and I used the 3mm stylus to get these Tutti Frutti pink dots right into the center of the light pink dots that we did. And that gives this all a lovely dimension. It gives you all of the different shades with that pop of color behind, like that nice background. So that light pink gives you that like Tutti Frutti pink background. It's beautiful. It really gives you a nice pop. Then on top of these Tutti Frutti bigger dots, I added a really cute little pink rhinestone, which worked out perfectly in sizes. I'm very thrilled with that. They look so cute with that Tutti Frutti rim on the outside and then that beautiful little rhinestone in the middle. Really pretty. Now I did the same thing with all these silver ones, but instead of pink, we did iridescent ones on the smaller 4. And these larger 4 are just plain rhinestones, same as this center one, and to match our teardrops as well. And that's all of the jewels that we did. But in continuation of top dots, I added a big pink dot right here in the center of all those ones. And I believe I used the 3.5 or the 4 for that to get a bigger dot. However, you can totally use your 3mm stylus. But as I mentioned before, if you want to increase the size of your dot, but not the size of the tool you're using, just make sure that you really, really coat your dotting tool in paint, because that extra paint can be used to increase the size of the dot that you're about to drop, which is what I did in the center of each of these to add that tutti frutti pink top dot on top. And ultimately, that is the entirety of this pattern. Again, I'm doing this recap because last night's live was really blurry. I had some technical difficulties. So I appreciate you tuning in tonight to see how we built out this pattern. This was not pre-planned. I made it live last night. I generally do not pre-plan my patterns. I might have some inspiration, but I generally build as I go. And this beginner-friendly pink, white, silver star for Christmas or the holiday season, or just because, is a beautiful, fun project. And all in all, I would say this probably cost less than $5 to make. Maybe a little bit more if you want to buy multiple sizes of rhinestones and stuff. But the star was like $1.75. We used a negligible amount of paint. And then all these little rhinestones and stuff. I had a fun time making this project, easily for under $10, but I'd say probably 5 or less. And the last step would be, once everything is completely dry, we're going to go back in with our eraser and get rid of all of those chalk lines. Make sure they're all gone. And then we're going to go ahead and put that varnish on. Now, keep in mind, when you have rhinestones in place, you don't want to put varnish on top of the rhinestones. It'll dull the shine. So you either want to paint around it, or you want to wait and add your rhinestones at the very, very end. So that's what I would have done had I not been making this in a live. If I was making this just at home as a project for myself, I would have completed all of my top dots and planned out where I wanted all of my rhinestones. And at that point, I would have given this at least one thin coat of this varnish, preferably glossy, but this one is matte because, lights. But a nice thin coat, preferably 2, and then come back when that's fully dry and put your little drops of Gorilla Glue and drop your rhinestones on top. And then I'm going to tie a little piece of jute cord and hang this because it's super pretty. And that's a quick recap of how I built this beautiful, festive star. And I hope you enjoyed this with me. Again, I'm hopeful that I never have to make another one of these recaps and that all of my lives continue to be in sharp focus going forward. But since that didn't work out last night, I decided to do this so that you'd always be able to come back and have a sense of how to build out this beautiful star for yourself at home. If you're interested in making one for yourself, please feel free to ask me questions in the chat. Or if you're watching this as a replay in the future, please comment below any questions that you have. I'd be so happy to walk you through the process a little bit further. This is something I really enjoy doing. I've been dot painting for probably about 6 or 7 years now. It's been quite a long time, and I thoroughly enjoy it, and I love teaching it to people as well. So if you're interested in seeing some more live dot-alongs, I have an entire playlist with a bunch of dot-along lives that I've done throughout Halloween and Christmas. There's so many of them there now. And if this isn't really your cup of tea and you'd rather see a more condensed version, I have a bunch of edited videos on my channel as well that are 100% beginner friendly. And we'll show you all the ins and outs of dot painting, lots of accessible things that you can do. And if you don't have dot painting tools, don't worry about it. You can totally use household items that you have around your home. Things like the tops of paintbrushes. You can get so many different sizes that you could use to make dots. Or again, let's never forget about our friends, the toothpicks that can make tiny, tiny, precise dots. And you could use the top of a pencil eraser to make one of those bigger, rounder dots that we might use for this pattern. Or perhaps the actual top, not the eraser, but the pencil itself to make smaller dots. Look around your home. You'll be shocked at how many things can make dots for you. I have this shish kebab skewer that has a great side on this side and a super pointy side on this side for precision. I have this dowel that also would give me a really lovely size for a dot. So don't let the fact that you don't own dotting tools stop you from learning dot painting, or at least giving it a try. You can totally do it with household items. And I have a number of videos that are step-by-step, and we'll show you exactly how to do that using your own homemade or non-traditional dotting tools that are not these rods or styluses. So don't let that stop you. There's so many ways that you can enjoy the fun and zen of dot painting. So I hope you enjoyed this recap, and please check out my channel for more beginner-friendly projects. And come back next week on Monday nights, every night till the end of 2025. Not every night, every Monday night until the end of 2025 at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be dot painting live together, step by step. On Thursday nights at 7 p.m., we'll be making a wreath. So come check that out. This Thursday, we're going to be making a beautiful red poinsettia wreath. I'm so excited to make it. I've been looking forward to that one for a while. And on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we pour candles live from start to finish. You see everything from melting the wax to the final finished product. And I'll even show you how to wrap them up for some gifts to give away. So I hope you will join me on this live, little ride that we're on right now. I've been having a great time doing all these projects, and I'd love to see you here again in the future. So don't forget to subscribe so that we can continue to get crafty together. Toodaloo!